So I will tell a little story today for the clip that we're creating on what it means to lead a congregation and how I learned. This is Daniel Juster coming to you from Jerusalem of Restoration from Zion Ministries, and I'm so glad to be sharing with you on principles of congregational growth and leadership, or principles of pastoral leadership or relational leadership. And you can access our books and teachings on Restoration from Zion website of Tikkun Global, tikkun.tv, and please check out our books and videos and all of the things that we make available for you. I want to speak about the importance of qualified leadership in Messianic Jewish congregations. Some 40 years ago, I was connecting to pastors in our local community, Montgomery County, Maryland, and I found that a lot of pastors were burned out. And as I would talk to them, I was asking them one question, and that question is, are you happy in the ministry? And I would oftentimes get evasive answers like, we must not grow weary in well-doing. And they were weary in well-doing, but we will reap in due time, if we're faithful. Or another one said, God is good. I said, I didn't ask you if God is good. I asked you if you were enjoying the ministry. And you know what I found out? Most of them were not really happy to be in ministry. It was overly burdensome. They thought it was important. They were trying to be faithful to it, but they didn't feel joy and release. They were just under it. Until one day I was at this conference of a network of churches in our area called New Covenant Churches. It was a network that was planted after the new Restoration Church models that were taking place 40 years ago. And I went up to one of the leaders. He was a younger leader. And I said to him, are you happy in the ministry? He said, yes. I said, do you have enough time for your family? He said, yes. And at this time, when I spoke with him, I had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. That was the extent of our children at that time. And I said, do you have time for vacations and other things? He said, yes. And then he said to me, I perceive that you are giving yourself to the traditional role of the pastor, and that's why it's wearing you out. Now, I wasn't totally doing that, but I partially was, and I didn't realize it, because in the traditional role of the pastor is there to preach and to teach and to counsel and to meet the needs of his people. And if you're not in a traditional town where you have a congregation of 100 people and you can go visit them all every few months and you are given to that, but you're in a metropolitan area and you have a congregation of anything more than 50 people, if you think that you're going to meet all of their needs and you're going to be involved with all their lives sufficiently to see them all discipled and conform to the image of Yeshua, obeying Yeshua's commandments, you're going to wear yourself out. And so I made an appointment with him. I talk about this friend in the book, Pierre Bynum, and I sat with him, and he made it very clear that in his model, the key issue is raising up leaders to care for the flock with you. That in the beginning, you start with a small group of people, maybe 25, but right away you are identifying people out of that 25 who you are going to bring into leadership with you, and you're going to disciple them into leadership. And then they are going to lead home groups that are part of the congregation, and that the shepherding and discipling will take place in the mentoring that is in the home group structure. This is amazing to me. I knew something about home groups for people to pledge their lives together and to care for each other, but the idea that my primary role as a leader was going to be to raise other leaders that would shepherd the flock with me, that was a revelation. And that we were going to be based in home groups. And at that time, I was wearing myself out. I was recording 550 calls a month. Can you imagine this as a young pastor of 33 years old, 32 years old? 550 calls a month for people who were in need saying, help, help, 550, help. Now, a lot of them were the same people, but, because, the needy people, they're always calling you, right? But 550, no wonder my family was hurting, my marriage was hurting. So I began to say, we're going to develop home groups, and I'm going to raise up leaders, and we're going to shepherd the flock together. And so I had a congregational meeting, and I presented this to the congregation, and they said to me, what are we paying you for? In other words, we're paying you to do the work of the ministry, and we're supposed to be the receiving end of your work. And I said, really, you'll be much happier with this model, because they did some studies at Fuller Seminary back then, and they found out that a pastor can really handle the needs of, at maximum, 50 people. And so this became the model, and the Lord was really gracious to us and allowed me to raise up a contingent of leaders, some of whom are very well known to this ministry. Back then I had Asher and Trader, and shortly after that, Eitan Shishkoff, who I was training into this model of ministry, Jerry Miller, who's still connected to us, Michael Rudolph, all of these people that I began to work with on this, most of them are still with us. It's quite astonishing, really, when you think about it. But we began to build a very strong congregation on the basis of this shared leadership model. Now, there's some other things to talk about, what to do when you train leaders into that model of leadership, which we're going to deal with on the next clip. But this really delivered me and made things so much better than it had been before. And I came to a place where I loved being the leader of a congregation and had time for family and children and all of these things. And we'll talk about that in the next clip.